Hello, I'm Bedzow, and this is The Good Life, a show that talks about all aspects of human flourishing, from physical and mental health to social and spiritual well-being. I want to thank our sponsors for the show, the Restoring Religious Freedom Project at Emory University School of Law, and Shlomo's Restaurant at the base of Aspen Mountain. The topic of today's show is the politics of science, and I will be speaking with David Houggy, who is the president of the Aspen Science Center. Before we begin discussing the details of how science became involved in politics and how politics became involved in science, let's break down the issue to give some background and set the stage. Today, disagreements in politics are no longer simply about debating different ways to solve commonly accepted problems, or even about differences in how to prioritize values. Today, political ideology influences which facts are deemed worthy of being considered true or not. By making facts subjective and truth relative, politics has created obstacles not only for coming to agreement in finding potential solutions, it has created a situation where we can't even recognize whether a description of a given set of events or circumstances has any value or not. On a grand scale, the politics of science has ramifications for future research that can help us build a safer and more just world. On the scale of the individual, when science becomes a handmaid into politics, the search for truth turns into justification for expediency and error. The result is that we become unable to productively live in the world since we lack the tools to understand it. With this setting the stage, let's hear how a leader in science education and awareness is fighting against the politics of science. David, first, thank you for coming.
Thank you, Ira.
Tell me about the Aspen Science Center. What's its goals? Who's its audience?
Sure. The Aspen Science Center, our mission is to advance the public understanding of science through lifelong discovery, exploration, and education. So basically, we're trying to teach people about what science is, what science isn't, get them to appreciate all the great things that science has done for us, for mankind, and can continue to do, and specifically trying to get kids interested in science so they want to go into STEM fields, STEM being science, science, technology, engineering, and math. And we chronically have a shortage of technologists or people with STEM backgrounds in this country. Only 16% of high school seniors in the country are interested in pursuing STEM majors, and of those, only 26% actually wind up in those majors. Others wind up in Wall Street and other places. And this is everything from researchers to technologists to software programmers to computer designers to doctors to pharmacists, anything with sort of a STEM-related degree. So,
do they end up not going into science and technology because they don't have the ability, they don't have the interest, or the financial motivation isn't there?
I think it's a combination of all of the above. I mean, if you're a really, if you're a math whiz, you can get a job at a university somewhere, maybe making probably not a lot of money for a while, or you can go to Wall Street and make $1 million doing arbitrage. We think that a big part of the problem is that kids just don't get into it early enough. And if you look at a young child, a kid who's 3 or 4, they're natural scientists. They're picking things up, they're taking them apart, they're asking questions, they're putting them in their mouths, they're putting their fingers in the light sockets, they're doing all these different things. And we want to encourage that. Maybe not so much the light socket thing, but they're curious. They're exploring their world, and they don't often get reinforcement that what you're really doing is science. So, if a kid builds a tower of blocks and it falls over, you may say, oh, that's too bad it fell over. Instead of saying, that's too bad it fell over. Hey, well, how would you do it differently next time? Why did it fall that way? What if we did it this way? Maybe we could build it higher. And then they're experimenting and learning. And we want to encourage that behavior in young kids. And we know that, first of all, if you ask a 4-year-old to draw a picture of a scientist, you get a picture of a white guy in a lab coat holding a beaker, right? And it doesn't necessarily feel like them. And in a lot of cases, even though there's math in elementary school and there's nominally some science stuff, but they don't really get science until they get to maybe the 7th grade and they get biology, and then oftentimes someone will say, okay, it's time for science and this stuff's kind of hard, which is not the message we want to send. We want to get them, so if we can get them early and get them excited about what they're doing, don't worry about the math and the formulas. Let's just get curious and inquisitive and do fun stuff. Hopefully they'll be excited enough about science, and then that passion for bugs or circuits or building or chemistry or whatever it is, gives them a reason to study the math and the formulas so that they can apply it better later on.
So is the Aspen Science Center's goal really to push science, but to push it to the almost direct consumer, which are the children, so that they advocate for themselves for more science in the schools? Or is it, we don't know what the schools are going to do, so we want to just have them interested outside of the schools? Where do you see the Aspen Science Center as its president going?
Yeah, so we want to definitely get the kids and their parents advocating for this. STEM jobs are growing 1.7 times the rate of non-STEM jobs. So they're out there and they're growing, and they typically pay much better. So there's a very good reason to get a STEM degree. Not that there's not a great reason to get a liberal arts degree. I'm not poo-pooing any of that. But we need these kids studying STEM, and the schools have got their hands full teaching them reading and writing and math and all the basics things, and especially with all the standardized tests that they have to get these kids ready for. And even in the best schools, and we've got some great schools here in the Valley, the research shows that kids still need time outside of school to pursue things in their own way, at their own pace, to follow their sort of natural curiosity and pursue the things that interest them as opposed to what happens to be being taught in the classroom. And so it's not a slight on the schools. Even with, like I said, even with the best schools, kids need that, what we call out-of-school STEM education, the after-school stuff where they can have more fun with the science and get inspired so that when they go into the classroom and they're learning these things, they understand why they're learning in the classroom what they're learning.
It's funny. It's almost as if you recognize that in order to be involved in science, we're always naturally involved in science, but it's not enough just to be interested in the equations or the elements, but it's being interested in the curiosity of how that actually works and how you can affect different, either anything from empirical observation to causation changes.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Richard Feynman, who's a Nobel-winning physicist, got his Nobel Prize in quantum mechanics in 1965. And he wrote a book called The Pleasure of Finding Things Out. And that's really what it's about, is trying to understand how things work from a scientific standpoint and using that knowledge to better appreciate the world. So we try with the kids, and about 75% of what we do is for kids. About 25% we have programs for adults, like the science of cooking that we do at the Cooking School of Aspen here, the science of music that we do at the Aspen Music Festival and School. We do monthly stargazers, is to find something they're interested in, like cooking, and get them to come to a really great meal, and they get some demonstration from the chefs of how to cook something different. And then we can explain the science, and they can see, oh, if I understand why meat browns, or if I understand that there are the different elements in a carrot and why if you cook it to different temperatures you get different textures, I understand better why I'm cooking it the way I do. And then I can be a better cook because I understand what's happening, and then if I understand what's happening, I can also then sort of stray from the recipe a little bit more and know what I can do. Mm-hmm. So we try to intersect with people in areas where they're interested and then show them how the science makes it even more interesting.
Right, so you said something interesting in terms of, you want to show how science can help you explain the world, whether it's, the world at large or even the science of your cooking.
Yeah.
And, I get that. I mean, when I was a kid, I learned that science was about facts and explanations. Today, when I read science articles or when you hear about scientific debates, they very seldom talk about facts, they talk about theories. Huh. And is it just because we've become less confident? Is it because scientists are just moving past the facts? Or what is happening from this change of talking about facts to talking about theories?
Yeah, I don't think anything's changed in the science. It may be, hopefully we're getting better communicating about it. I think scientists are not very good about communicating how science works. So for example, you'll often hear science say, well, science has proven this. And the reality is that science can't prove anything, and it startles people when I say that. But science can disprove things. We set up a theory. If we do an experiment and the theory is invalid, then we know that that was the wrong answer. If the theory was valid, then we know that that could still be the right answer, but it might still get disproven someday. So, Newton came up with his laws of gravity and his laws of motion, and they were held to be ironclad, rock solid, accurate for hundreds of years until Einstein came along and said, well, but if you're going at the speed of light, they don't quite work and you have to modify them. And so, Einstein wasn't wrong per se. He was right within the set of data that he had with the observations he could make. But when you expanded that data set, the theory had to change. And so it's kind of like the sculptor who takes the block of marble and you say, how did you sculpt that beautiful bust? And he said, well, I just took away everything that wasn't the art. And in science, we're trying to chip away at everything that's not the truth, and what we're left with is the truth for now until we learn more, and then we have to change it. And I think that's confounding to people because they expect science to be, absolute and everlasting. And scientists will say, well, we found this new discovery at CERN. We some new data, we think maybe there's a new particle. And then a month later they come back and they say, nope, it wasn't a new particle, it was noise. Well, that's the way science is supposed to work, is you put out your data, you put forth your experimental results, you put forth your theory, and then your peers review it, and they try to attack it and prove it wrong. And if it survives that process, then it's valid for now. So anyway, get back to your point. So I think your question about facts and theories, facts are sort of a historical observation of the world. If I drop my pen, I can say I dropped my pen and it hit the table. That's a fact that I think we would all pretty much agree on. The theory is trying to predict what's going to happen going forward. I mean, it explains a broader set of facts that's historically, but also has something to say about what's happening going forward. And to the layman, theory means, well, it's a theory. It's sort of a guess. But to scientists, a theory is the pinnacle of achievement because it's something that's been widely demonstrated to be true, or widely demonstrated to seem to be true, to have not been disproven, over a wide set of conditions, over a large number of experiments, after wide peer review. And so the theory is really the pinnacle of what's happening. And the more we learn about the facts, the more we're able to sort of connect the dots and say, oh, I see, we had this over here and this over here and this, all these different things happening. I think I sort of see an explanation for why that explains all of those things, and that's a theory.
You said something that I think is one of the reasons why politics was able to permeate through science. Mm-hmm. The idea that science can disprove things, but it can't prove something. I think the politics of science and scientific explanations focuses on the can't prove part,
yes,
and forgets about the can disprove part.
Yes. And so, take quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics is probably statistically the most proven or, valid theory that we have. It's been just incredible, many, many repeated experiments, not just lab experiments, but the fact that you have holding a phone in your hand that works is because we understand quantum mechanics and can design silicon-based circuits. And it's something like, 1 part in a billion or something has been proven. So it's like 99.99999XXX% true. But we may someday learn something else where we say, we got to modify it a little bit. And there's some, confounding observations out there that, quantum mechanics is sort of not compatible with some of the things we know about relativity. And so we haven't been able to sort of make those things square up yet. So there's a lot that we don't know.
Well, let me ask you, in terms of getting the funding for research to find out more of what we know, mm-hmm. or even educating people on what we do know to make sure that they're aware of it, yeah. How have you found the politics and the public debates surrounding scientific issues affecting science education at all levels of pedagogy?
Well, I mean, we know that currently there's a lot of pressure on funding for scientific research. There is pressure being put on scientists or disallowing them from publishing certain results that some people don't like. And there is movement to, as we consider the federal budget and the fact that we aren't bringing enough money to pay the bills, looking at cutting after-school funding for after-school science programs in some cases. And so those things are all very concerning. I think that at least in this valley, the parents of the children understand, many adults understand the importance of science and how much it's contributed to society. And are supportive of the kind of things that we and other organizations are doing. And if you think about, just think about all the things you wouldn't have if we didn't have science and technology. You wouldn't have modern medicine. We wouldn't have TVs. You wouldn't have electricity. You wouldn't have a cell phone. You wouldn't have air transportation. We wouldn't have space travel. We wouldn't have satellites. I mean, we wouldn't have safe food. We wouldn't have, it just on and on and on and on. All, almost everything that we enjoy from the physical world as consumers is related to technology somewhere along the line, the internet. And it's through, we create innovation and create jobs in the service sector and other areas, but it's really through, my view, technology innovation that we create new industries and new jobs and things that we can produce in this country that the rest of the world wants, which is ultimately what we have to do if we want to get increase the economic growth of the country and increase our tax base and pay off our bills and be able to afford all the things we want to afford.
So, it's funny, I would think that most people are happy with advances in medicine and advances in engineering. And I'm not sure if that's where the debates really are.
Yeah.
The debates, although we could say in climate science, even if it's very practical, there's a lot of debates there. Fine, we can get to that.
Yeah.
But I also think that people aren't, as much as they recognize the value of the practical sciences, they may not even be aware of the theoretical sciences.
Right.
How has the politics of science affected theoretical physics and high-level mathematics in terms of that is a foundation on which the practical sciences rely?
Yes.
But it is also something that we don't see so much value in and of itself outside of the ivory tower of academia.
Yeah, that's right. I think people say, what is the point of doing this research? Do you have an application? And the researchers or the theorists will figure out something that they can sell to the politicians. But we often don't know. The importance of doing research for research's sake is that we often don't know where it's going to go. When Einstein was developing his theory of relativity, and he got the Nobel Prize in 1915 for his theory of general relativity, if you'd said, what's the practical application of this? The fact that we know what happens if we're going near the speed of light, I think he would have said, I have no idea, because who would ever, we're never going to be going the speed of light. But it turns out that satellites are high enough in orbit and they're going fast enough that they are affected by relativity, and so their clocks slow down just a little bit. And so there's a clock that's running the computer that has to be in sync with the clock on the ground so that they can get the timing right. You get a timestamp signal from different satellites, and based on when you get it, how far away those satellites were, so you can triangulate your position. So you have to know exactly what the time is on those satellites. If the system didn't know that general relativity existed and didn't incorporate the equations of general relativity when it was making those calculations, your position on the GPS on your phone would drift by 30 feet a day, and you would get further and further away from where you actually were, and it would be completely useless. So 100 years ago, I don't think Einstein knew that, hey, I got to figure this out so that we can have GPS systems. But it's important that we do research for research's sake. A good example of where the politics interfered was with the superconducting super collider in Texas. It was going to be a massive super collider where they could smash atoms and particles together and learn about the subatomic world, the quantum world, which could lead to all sorts of different discoveries. And they had started construction. There's big tunnels and holes in the ground, and it got canceled because it was like, well, should we spend the money on the super collider, or should we spend more money on defense or giving tax cuts to different people? And it didn't seem, there wasn't a convincing enough case for the politicians to say, yeah, we're going to invest this money on faith that something's going to come out of it. And instead, CERN was built, the large collider in CERN was built, and they discovered the Higgs boson. And which, okay, they did it instead of us. From a scientific standpoint, it doesn't matter who does it, but it's, to an extent, we ceded our lead because we were the leaders in synchrotrons and particle accelerators, and we ceded that lead to other people. And how do we feel about that? And so that's an example where politics directly interfered with fundamental research.
One of the things that interests me is, and I'm glad you brought up the theory of relativity, because it took a while for relativity to be accepted, and there was a big debate not only among theoretical physicists, but also among philosophers, about the meaning behind the theory of relativity. Not only in terms of how to explain it, but what does it also mean in terms of conceptions of time and so forth.
Yeah.
Where there's a big difference between the scientific method, which is a method of gathering data and seeking to understand it in a way that is coherent, and scientism, which is a reductionist worldview that says only science can give you a proper description of reality, and there's no other ways to describe the world outside of the rules of the scientific method. Now, that occurs in intellectual debates in philosophy of science and so forth, but it also has reverberations in the politics of science, because people then think that scientists have a hidden agenda because scientists think that they see the world correctly in the limited scope of the scientific method. I would hope, can you speak to that a little bit in terms of the politics of science and the Aspen Science Center, of how does the scientific method and scientism, do they have to go hand in hand? Is there a way to separate them, and how do you approach that type of issue?
No, I don't think they have to go hand in hand at all. I mean, look, I know plenty of scientists who will say, you know, I don't buy spiritualism or religion, and we're here in this physical world, and it's just the physical world, and when I'm dead, I'm done, and I blink out of existence, and that's just the way it goes. And, you know, everything that we see can be explained by science. I'm always wary of any group or theory that says we are the only way and there's no other way to understand things. You know, and look, the scientific, the body of science, physics, explains the physical world. It doesn't have anything to say about the spiritual world. It doesn't have much, you know, we're working on brain science and understanding consciousness and emotion. That's still a pretty murky subject. And, you know, someone can say, well, scientists explains everything that there is. But the reality is that, you know, all of the atoms, the molecules, the planets, the stars, the galaxies, you know, 100 billion galaxies with 100 billion stars, everything that we can see all the way back to the Big Bang, we think is only 5% of what exists, because the other 95% is dark energy and dark matter. So it would be a little bit arrogant for science to say we understand everything when it's really 5% of what we can see. But science does do a very good job of explaining the physical world. But I don't think that means that you can't be spiritual. I know plenty of scientists who are religious or who are spiritual. And you know, the reality is, I like to say that you know, God starts where science stops. And you know, it used to be we didn't know why the sun came up, so we invented the sun god, and we would do, you know, have rites and sacrifices to the sun god to make sure the sun came up. Well, now we understand why the sun comes up, so we don't need that sun god anymore. So we sort of push God back a little bit. But you can go, you know, you can wind with physics. You can go all the way back to the Big Bang. And we're starting to get some theories about what right before the Big Bang, that, you know, virtual particles popping in and out of existence that may have caused the Big Bang. But at some point you run into the point where you just have to say, well, we don't know what caused that original event. And you know, the question then is, are you comfortable saying, well, I just don't know, and we're going to work on figuring it out? Or do you say, there must have been some sort of divine intervention, and that leads you to a religious or a spiritual belief?
Yeah, you know, we keep talking about the theoretical aspects of, you know, explaining reality. But you know, scientism also has the parallel in the normative aspects of the world. Like, for example, you know, there are many traditions of human flourishing and virtue ethics and so forth that says that the theoretical sciences or the intellectual pursuits will help form the moral pursuits. And the moral pursuits will also help inform and make one better in their intellectual pursuits. Science, however, seems to focus on empirical data that doesn't have a value system associated in terms of the ethics of interpersonal relations. It has values of, we want things to be clear, we want things to be simple or explain without you know, extra stuff, if you will.
Yeah.
Like, so they have a values of the scientific method, but not necessarily a value system that means I'm a scientist, I'm a better person morally, ethically. I would like to hear if you disagree with that statement.
Well, again, that can be true. Just like in any other profession, you can study things that may or may not improve your morality. But I think science is fundamentally about questioning things, and as you say, the search for truth, whatever that means, and getting back to sort of fundamental questions. And I think if you start to think about cosmology and the origins of the universe and the origin of the Big Bang, at some point you get pushed back to the point where you have to say, I don't know what happens now, and how do I feel about that? And so that leads to, for me, that has led to great personal introspection. To when you finally have, to me, the two fundamental questions of life are where did we come from and where are we going? And they're almost by definition unknowable.
No, I hear you. And you're making a great point. I would even add that the scientific pursuit is about asking questions and not relying on group consensus.
Yes.
And that's also a very strong skill for ethical deliberation, too.
Richard Feynman said, I would rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned. And science is all about questioning the answers. And another just more concrete example was Manhattan Project. They developed the atomic bomb, and because there was war on, we were worried that Germany was going to get the bomb and before us, and what were we going to do? We had to develop the atomic bomb, and they developed it, and they set the first one off, and I think Heisenberg said, "My God, what have we done?" And Einstein wrote a letter with some other scientists to the White House saying, "This is terrible. We can't do this. We've unleashed this, horrific power, which has incredible moral implications for us and how we use it." And now, maybe we had to do it because somebody else was going to do it first.
Of course.
But it's to say that the scientists didn't have any sort of ethics or morality around what they had done, I think is not true.
No, David, I want to thank you so much. This has been an education for me, and I hope for everyone else who's watching. We've reached the part of our show where I recommend a book that can provide greater insight into the topic we've been discussing. This week, I recommend Not a Scientist: How Politicians Mistake, Misrepresent, and Utterly Mangle Science by David Levitan. Levitan's book makes us aware that we must be careful about how we view the search for meaning, and that we may arrive at more satisfying answers when we embrace difficult facts rather than dismiss them as scientific. We will close each show with a maxim that we hope will provide a simple takeaway that keeps you mindful of the ideas discussed. This week, the maxim is, though the scientist is empirical, science need not oppose the spiritual. We hope that with this show, you've come a little bit closer to achieving the good life.